besides the theory of evolution, the cell theory is probably the second big unifying theory in whole biology. It does not really matter in which area of biology you deal with. You're always gonna be dealing somehow directly or indirectly with cells, because as a matter of fact, the cell theory states that all living organisms, all living things are made of cells. You cannot find a living thing which is not made of cells. There's also a second point in the cell theory which states that a cell is the basic unit of life. And this means that you cannot, living things must be at least one cell large. If you have a thing which is only half a cell large, then it's not alive. It's a dead organism or it's a dead cell. But you need at least one cell. This means that viruses, which are not made of cells, are also not alive. And there is a third part in the cell theory which states that cells can only come from other cells. It is not possible to make cells out of non-living things, at least not right now. Scientists are working on that. They're trying to create artificial cells. They have had more or less success in that. But, well, actually life as we know it can only come from other living cells. Now, the thing is the following. It's kind of easy to say all of that, but there were many people involved over a long time, and many people spent their whole lifetime researching cells. And even though it's easy to say that, it's not so easy to really come up with an experiment. Or, for example, even the statement that all living things are made of cells. I mean, I have not seen all living things yet. So how can I predict that? How can I know that all living things are made of cells if I have not even seen all of them yet? Well, that is the nature of a scientific theory. The theory is valid until it's proven wrong, and so far the cell theory has not been proven wrong. If you think that not all living things are made of cells, it's very easy for you to find out. You grab yourself a microscope and you find me a living thing which is not made of cells, and I promise you're going to be pretty famous. Well, so far it has not happened, and it's probably not going to happen. I've included over here 3 pictures. One gentleman over here on the left is Matthias Jakob Schleiden. He basically discovered, or he proposed, that all plants are made of cells. He was investigating plants. He saw that there are cells there, and he came to the conclusion, well, it's kind of interesting. Whatever plant I look at, they're all made of cells. So I guess all plants must be made of cells. Then Theodor Schwann stated, he observed animals. All animals are made of cells. Now, that's also quite interesting because not all animal cells are easy to see. They have different shapes. It's not so easy all the time. But he came to the conclusion that all animals are made of cells. And Rudolf Virchow over here, he said, well, actually, cells can only come from pre-existing cells. This was his prediction. But you go ahead and you try to devise or come up with an experiment that actually demonstrates this. So it was actually Louis Pasteur who then came up with an experiment to actually state or to prove that cells can only come from pre-existing cells. So why am I telling you all of that? Things that we basically take for granted, that we take for relatively straightforward, such as the cell theory, really took some people their whole lifetime researching in order to find that out. So that is something that certainly has to be recognized. So let's move on now to the next slide. And I would like to show you now some exceptions to the cell theory. And I just see that essentially this slide is missing the title over here, so I write down some certain exceptions. Exceptions to the cell theory. Now, exceptions, if I say exceptions, it does not mean that the cell theory is wrong, but there are certain interesting special cases over here. And the first case is skeletal muscle. And the skeletal muscle fibers, they contain multiple nuclei. So if you see these small dots over here, okay, these are all, it's a nucleus, that's a nucleus, that's a nucleus, okay, so these are all nuclei. And as a matter of fact, how many cells do we have over here? Normally, every cell has its own nucleus, but not in skeletal muscle. In skeletal muscles, the cells kind of fuse together, and what you have is you have a gigantic gigantic cells that stretch for a long distance, but they contain multiple nuclei. That's important because the muscle fibers, they're protein fibers running through the muscle, and they have to contract. And if you have individual cells there, then the protein fibers would not be able to run all the way through. So what you have over here is you have essentially fused cells. And yeah, that's what I mentioned over here. And then there is another example. Certain green algae, for example, Acipularia, can be up to 10 centimeters tall, but they're single-celled and contain only one nucleus. So what you see over here is the cap of this green algae, or the hood, and this one over here essentially is a living thing, but it's made of one cell only, and it's pretty big. So how big are cells? Can you actually say that some cells are actually 10 centimeters tall? It's a little bit of a question of definition over here. And then there's certain fungi, and these are the thread-like hyphae of the fungi, and they contain also many nuclei, but they're not made of single cells. So over here you also have structures that are kind of fused together, which contain multiple nuclei, but are not made of smaller individual cells. Now, I'm saying over here that even though this is not a contradiction to the cell theory, because you still see that there are nuclei involved, you still see that essentially you have a similar biochemistry, but the organization into small cells is not always given. So, and that was basically a short introduction into the cell theory. I highly recommend that you memorize, I go back one slide, these 3 points over here. That's a very nice multiple choice question. For example, which one of the following statements is not part of the cell theory? And one of the answers could be oxygen requirement. Do all cells need oxygen? Well, no, that's not part of the cell theory. And as a matter of fact, not all cells require oxygen. So if you know this, then I think you're already quite on the safe side.